At about 12:23 on the morning of 31st August 1997, a Mercedes-Benz S280 struck the 13th central pillar of the Pont de l'Alma underpass at roughly 105 kilometers an hour. Dodi Fayed, 42 years old and seated in the rear, suffered catastrophic injuries and was pronounced dead at the scene. 3 minutes earlier, he had left the Ritz, Paris with Diana, Princess of Wales. Hours earlier, he had visited Reposi in Place Vendôme and obtained the ring that would feed years of argument over a proposal. A month earlier, outside film and high society circles, he had not been a man generally recognized in the street. Then one photograph of Dodi and Diana on a yacht turned him into quarry. He had private aircraft within reach, family apartments in Park Lane and Paris, great yachts, and an allowance reported at about $100,000 a month. Yet there was no reliable audited figure showing that Dodi himself was a billionaire. The fortune belonged chiefly to the vast world of his father, Mohamed Al-Fayed. Dodi lived near a crown, without ever proving it was his. Everyone remembers the tunnel. Most remember the princess. Buried beneath those two facts was another life. Alexandria, Le Rosey, Sandhurst, Hollywood, an Oscar-winning film he helped finance but did not win an Oscar for, a dead mother, an 8-month marriage, an angry former lover, and 6 weeks of fame so intense that men followed his car through Paris. This is the story of a man who spent 42 years trying to become more than somebody else's son, and became world famous only when the world was about to lose him. Dodi was born in Alexandria on the 15th of April 1955. His full name was Imad el-Din Mohamed Abdel Menahem Fayed, though the shorter name followed him into London, Hollywood, and history. His father, Mohamed Fayed, had married Samira Khashoggi in 1954. Samira came from the prominent Khashoggi family. Her brother, Adnan Khashoggi, would become known internationally as a businessman and arms dealer. The marriage of Mohammed and Samira failed while their son was still very young. By 1959, they were divorced. Mohammed had custody, and Dodi grew up chiefly inside a world directed by his father. Mohammed later married the Finnish-born Heini Wathen and had 4 more children: Omar, Camilla, Karim, and Jasmine. Dodi remained the eldest son, the child of the first marriage, and the first male life on which Mohammed's ambitions could cast their full length. Money was present. Stability was less certain. It was said that servants had often cared for Dodi while Mohammed travelled, and even relatives were uncertain where he had spent parts of his childhood. He had luxury travel, expensive possessions, and access to family properties. At his 30th birthday party, Dodi became emotional and said that nobody had given him a birthday party before. The story endured because it fitted the man known to those around him, shy, gentle, materially privileged, and hungry for the ordinary sensation of being remembered. He attended Collège Saint-Marc in Alexandria. In 1968, at about 13, Mohammed sent him to Institut Le Rosey in Switzerland. Between Collège Saint-Marc in Alexandria and Le Rosey in Switzerland, Dodi's education changed countries before he was 14. In 1968, the move to Le Rosey placed another decision of his young life in Mohammed's hands. A boy cared for by servants while his father travelled was sent to an elite Swiss school and left it within roughly a year. The school placed Dodi among children of royalty and immense fortunes, but he remained there for only about a year. Le Rosey seems to have been difficult for him. The boy who could enter rarefied rooms had already begun learning that entry and belonging were not the same thing. The Le Rosey episode was brief enough to matter. Dodi arrived in 1968 and left after roughly 1 year. At 13 or 14, surrounded by an elite institution in Switzerland, He had already met a pattern that would follow him into film. Access was immediate, but a lasting role still had to be built after the invitation. In January 1974, at 19, Dodi entered a 6-month course at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst. He stayed until June. At Sandhurst, Dodi was quiet, intelligent, pleasant, friendly, and capable of humour. He completed the 6-month course and received a commission equivalent to second lieutenant. Dodi considered joining the Dubai Air Force, but no lasting military career followed. Instead, during the mid-1970s, he briefly served as an attaché at the United Arab Emirates Embassy in London. The move suited the geography of his life. Alexandria behind him, Switzerland in his schooling, Britain around him, the Gulf within his family's network. He was acquiring uniforms, introductions, and credentials, but not yet a vocation that was unmistakably his own. The difference between Dodi and Mohamed was plain. Mohamed built, pressed, financed, and fought. Dodi had been painfully quiet in youth and grew into an adult eager to please. He was charming. Women recalled flowers, jewelry, luxury food and clothing, journeys and gifts. Suzanne Gregard would later describe his rapid proposal and marriage as entirely in keeping with his impulsiveness. He seemed to reach for affection with both hands, and very often there was something expensive in them. His religious identity remained private and not entirely simple. He was widely described as having been raised Muslim, while his former wife recalled Dodi once telling her that he considered himself Catholic. It is safer to leave the inner chamber of belief where Dodi left it. What can be seen is the outer pattern: father, servants, schools, travel, and the repeated search for a place that might hold him longer than a season. There was one interest that did. Dodi loved movies from his teens. Through Barbara Broccoli, daughter of James Bond producer Albert I. Cubby Broccoli, the Fayed family moved closer to the film world. Here was an industry built on names, money, entrances, and illusion, but it also made tangible things. A picture went onto a screen. An audience sat down. A credit appeared. Dodi had not inherited a position of his own. In film, for the first time, he could at least see an empty chair with his name near it. Then, in 1979, Allied Stars was established. Allied Stars gave Dodi a senior place inside a film production operation backed by Fayed money. The first major project was Breaking Glass, for which Allied Stars provided substantial financing. Dodi was not starting at the bottom of a studio or carrying reels through corridors. His father's capital had opened the door, and yet a door opened by family money can still lead to real work and real consequences. The great consequence arrived with Chariots of Fire. Allied Stars helped finance the film, and Dodi was associated with it as a producer and executive producer. The story of British runners at the 1924 Paris Olympics reached cinemas in 1981. On March 29, 1982, at the 54th Academy Awards, Chariots of Fire won 4 Oscars, including Best Picture. It is often said that Dodi won an Oscar. He did not receive the Best Picture statuette. David Putnam was the Academy-listed Best Picture producer and recipient. Dodi's name belonged to the film's financing and executive production history, and that was significant enough without placing the award in his hand. Allied Stars financing helped Chariots of Fire reach the screen, and Dodi held an executive producer association. When the Academy honored Best Picture, David Putnam was the named recipient. Dodi's contribution did not need a statuette to matter. Still, imagine the fact as Dodi could state it in 1982. A film tied to Allied Stars had just won Best Picture. For a young man who had spent so much of his life being introduced through Mohamed, a screen credit offered a different kind of introduction. He had not merely arrived in a family car. His name appeared on a successful film. The distinction mattered because Mohamed remained decisive behind the company. Major financing decisions ultimately ran through Mohamed, while professional managers handled much of the detailed production labor. Dodi's role was real, but it was never entirely free of Mohamed's hand. Without that hand, the money might not have arrived. With it, every achievement carried the old question: how much had Dodi himself done? For a while, the question did not spoil the ascent. Dodi moved through London, Paris, and Los Angeles. The Fayed world gave him access to private aircraft, large yachts, and family properties. Apartments he used in Park Lane and Paris were described as his father's. In Los Angeles, Dodi rented homes. Family holiday properties were available in Saint-Tropez, Gstaad, and Scotland. The most detailed financial portrait of him placed his allowance at about $100,000 a month, roughly $1.2 million a year before the value of family assets around him was counted. This was wealth at a level most men never approach, yet the wording matters. No trustworthy probate figure or audited personal net worth calculation established Dodi as a billionaire in his own right. He lived like the international ultra-rich because Mohamed's fortune and properties made that life possible. The scepter in Dodi's hand was never fully detached from the man who had handed it to him. His film credits continued. In 1986, he was involved as a producer on the thriller F/X. In 1991 came associations with F/X2 and Steven Spielberg's Hook. Dodi's connection with Hook grew out of efforts involving rights to Peter Pan, though his actual role in making Spielberg's film was limited despite the executive producer credit. In 1995, he received an executive production credit linked with The Scarlet Letter starring Demi Moore, and the production later became entangled in business disputes. There was, then, a career. It should not be erased. Allied stars had put money into films, and Chariots of Fire mattered enormously. Nor should the career be inflated into a studio operation personally commanded by Dodi. The pattern was more delicate. Access, finance, a genuine enthusiasm for cinema, important credits, and always Mohamed somewhere behind the ledger. Dodi's character made the film world socially easy for him. He was charming and generous, a man capable of elaborate gestures. Friends and female companions received flowers, jewelry, clothing, luxury food, and travel. The same generosity could spill into disorder. Reports accumulated of late or unpaid bills, rent, and creditors. Mohamed rejected the picture of a son deeply in debt and later insisted that Dodi owed nobody when he died. The precise extent of Dodi's liabilities remained disputed. What did not remain disputed was dependency. His father funded Allied stars. His father supported the lifestyle. His father's properties and money formed the stage on which Dodi tried to stand as an individual. At 30, Dodi had a Best Picture-winning film in his professional history, a producer's credits, and a monthly allowance larger than many annual fortunes. After the 1982 Academy triumph, the light was bright. A shadow was already inside the golden glow. The first crack in Dodi's life was not one scandal or one unpaid account. It was the repeated failure of achievement to separate him from Mohamed. By the middle of the 1980s, Dodi could point to Chariots of Fire and F/X, yet colleagues still saw his father controlling crucial financing and professional managers doing much of the daily work. The son had a career, but the father still held the purse. The same question followed Dodi from one film credit to the next throughout the decade. That arrangement offered Dodi extraordinary protection. It also kept him from the ordinary test of consequence. His reported allowance of about $100,000 a month arrived within a larger family system of aircraft, yachts, apartments, and holiday properties. When stories of unpaid bills, rent, and creditors appeared, the stories could become arguments about Mohamed's money as much as Dodi's conduct. Mohamed denied that his son had died owing money. The exact balance sheet stayed contested. The reputation for financial disorder did not. No audited personal fortune was ever established for Dodi himself. Dodi answered uncertainty in ways his friends had long recognized. He gave, he courted, he moved. Flowers, jewelry, clothing, luxury food, and travel could turn affection into an event. He could be intensely romantic. Beneath the charm sat an eagerness to please, almost before he had worked out what he himself wanted. We have all seen a life that looks settled from the pavement because the car is polished and the address is excellent. Dodi's addresses included Park Lane, Paris, Los Angeles, Saint-Tropez, Gstaad, and Scotland. The unsettled thing travelled with him. The film work did not resolve that insecurity. Chariots of Fire remained the peak. F/X added a solid credit in 1986. F/X2 and Hook came in 1991, and The Scarlet Letter in 1995. Yet Dodi never established a public identity as a major independent producer, commanding a company apart from his father's finance. Before 1997, he was known largely within film and wealthy social circles. He was not generally a man strangers recognized in the street. Chariots of Fire and Hook made the problem especially plain. The first carried Allied Star's substantial financial contribution and gave Dodi an Executive Producer Association with a Best Picture winner. The second grew from efforts involving the rights to Peter Pan, yet Dodi's actual role in Steven Spielberg's 1991 film was limited despite his executive producer credit. The titles grew famous. His personal authority remained difficult to separate from financing, contracts, and Mohamed. It was said that Dodi had wealth but wanted greater fame. The years after Chariots of Fire gave the remark weight. In 1982, Chariots of Fire had put his name beside a Best Picture winner. By 1995, The Scarlet Letter could still put an executive production credit on screen. Even so, Dodi remained more readily explained through Mohamed than through Allied Stars. The father owned the great symbols. The son had credits, an allowance, and access. Recognition had come in fragments, never in a form strong enough to stop people adding the words Mohamed Al-Fayed's son. His romantic life developed the same pattern of intensity without permanence. Dodi was linked socially or romantically with actresses and models, and newspapers found the word Playboy convenient. The label caught the yachts, cars, glamour, and women. It missed the quieter descriptions of a man who could be painfully shy, remembered birthdays, and reached for intimacy through grand gestures. Both pictures could sit in the same chair. In 1986, Dodi's mother, Samira, was still one of the oldest absences in his life. His parents had divorced by 1959. Mohamed had custody. Servants had cared for Dodi while his father travelled, and childhood had never settled into a simple family story. He had tried to reconnect with Samira. The distance between them had shaped him before Hollywood knew his name. And yet the first stumble was already becoming a fall. The money allowed Dodi to postpone decisions. The family company allowed professional authority to remain blurred. Romance allowed him to feel chosen for an evening, but his impulsiveness could carry him toward promises faster than his steadiness could support them. By 1986, Dodi could survive a disputed bill, a weak film project, or another season in Mohamed's professional orbit. That year brought a loss no allowance could postpone. It reached further back than Hollywood or Allied Stars. Dodi was 31. Samira's old absence was about to become permanent. In March 1986, Samira Khashoggi died suddenly of a heart attack. She was 51, Dodi was 31. His mother had been distant through much of his childhood after the divorce from Mohamed. By 1959, Mohamed had custody. Dodi later said servants had often cared for him while his father travelled, and even relatives gave uncertain recollections of where the boy spent parts of those early years. The adult Dodi could cross from London to Paris or Los Angeles with family money behind him. The child at the beginning of that journey had no machinery for returning to 1959. By Samira's death, nearly 3 decades had passed since the marriage to Mohamed broke down. Dodi had tried to reconnect with his mother. The important fact was not that every lost year had been repaired. It was that there had still been time in which repair remained possible. A heart attack ended that possibility in March 1986, without warning and without farewell. For a man repeatedly drawn toward affection, the unfinished relationship was now finished by death. It was said that Samira's death affected Dodi deeply and that an emotional decline followed. The hard facts carried enough weight. Samira died of a heart attack in 1986. Her son had spent years with a childhood distance between them. At 31, no future meeting could alter it. In 1986, the scepter slipped. Not because Dodi lost his father's money, he did not. Not because Allied stars vanished. F/X carried his producer association onto another film that same year. The slip was inward. The person whose absence had helped shape his hunger for affection was now beyond any future reconciliation. The family around Dodi was not small. Mohamed had married Haini Waten and had 4 more children, Omar, Camilla, Karim, and Jasmine. Dodi was still the eldest son from Mohamed's marriage to Samira. Her death therefore did not leave him without relatives. It ended the only maternal relationship at the center of his earliest years. The distinction matters because Dodi's adult pattern was not one of physical solitude. It was the more curious solitude of a man repeatedly described as lonely, while people, staff, and money remained all around him. At 31, Dodi had already moved through College Saint-Marc, Le Rosey, Sandhurst, a brief attaché posting at the UAE Embassy in London, and 7 years of Allied stars. Those institutions had given him education, a military credential, diplomacy, and film credits. Samira's death exposed the limit common to all of them. None could change the first family from which Dodi had come. This was the central cruelty of Dodi's inheritance. Mohamed could finance Allied stars, support apartments, provide aircraft, yachts, holiday properties, and an extraordinary allowance. None of those instruments could renegotiate a childhood or reopen a grave. The Fayed fortune could move Dodi across countries in hours. It could not move him backward one day. Dodi did not become a recluse after Samira died. He continued to travel, work in film, socialize, and pursue relationships. That is why the change is easy to miss. A man could be in Los Angeles, have a producer credit, send jewelry, and still be carrying an old loss into every new room. By 1991, Dodi had credits connected with F/X2 and Hook. The Peter Pan project carried the name of Steven Spielberg and the prestige of a major Hollywood production, but Dodi's actual involvement in making Hook was limited, despite his executive producer credit. In 1995, the Scarlet Letter added another executive production association and another business dispute to his career. Each credit kept him near cinema. None repeated the professional brilliance of Chariots of Fire. On March 29, 1982, the film had won Best Picture. By the 1990s, that triumph remained the highest point attached to Dodi's career, and even there the Academy's official recipient was David Putnam. The weight gathered quietly after Samira's death. A film career that was neither fraudulent nor fully independent. Repeated accusations of chaotic money management, disputed by Mohamed in their severity. A father whose wealth made nearly every visible freedom possible and therefore made freedom difficult to prove. The emotional decline after 1986 did not end in one dramatic recovery. Dodi's next years supplied more work, more travel, and more relationships. One of those relationships moved very quickly. By the end of 1986, Suzanne Gregar was in Dodi's life. After Samira's death, the long aftermath had begun. Late in 1986, Dodi proposed to the American model Suzanne Gregar. The proposal came quickly enough that Gregar herself later treated the speed as characteristic of him. They married around New Year's and honeymooned in Malibu. With Suzanne, Dodi was romantic and thoughtful. The marriage lasted about 8 months. There was no documented dynastic battle or years-long divorce war. It ended. Dodi did not marry again, and no children are publicly documented in his life. The eldest son of Mohamed Al-Fayed, surrounded by 4 younger half-siblings and a family business world stretching through London and Paris, remained personally unsettled. The financial structure beneath that unsettled life had not changed. The most detailed portrait of Dodi's money placed Mohamed's allowance at about $100,000 a month. The Park Lane and Paris apartments Dodi used were described as his father's. Dodi rented homes in Los Angeles and used family holiday properties in Saint-Tropez, Gstaad, and Scotland. After Suzanne, the machinery for another glamorous courtship was always available. A stable marriage was not. By the time F/X2 and Hook appeared in 1991, Dodi was 36. By The Scarlet Letter in 1995, he was 40. The calendar advanced even when the lifestyle seemed able to repeat the same expensive season: film associations, travel, family properties, and relationships marked by elaborate gifts. In 1996 and 1997, Dodi became seriously involved with the American model Kelly Fisher. Fisher believed they were engaged and planning to marry. Dodi had promised a Malibu home and led her toward a shared future. Whether a formal engagement existed was another matter. Fisher believed marriage had been promised. Then came July 1997. Dodi and Diana, Princess of Wales, had encountered one another years earlier. A known meeting took place at a 1986 polo event at Windsor, where a Fayed team played against a team involving Prince Charles. No strong evidence placed a romance there. For 11 years, the acquaintance remained merely part of the crowded social map around wealthy families and polo. On July 11, 1997, Diana arrived in Saint-Tropez with her sons William and Harry as Mohamed Al-Fayed's guest. She wanted a secure place to spend time with the boys. On the evening of July 14th, Dodi joined the family holiday. 6 days later, on July 20th, Diana returned to England with William and Harry. Dodi stayed in Saint-Tropez. The great public story had not yet broken. During the weekend of July 26th, Dodi and Diana spent time together in Paris and could still move relatively freely, with little media attention. On July 31st, they flew to Nice and boarded Mohamed's yacht, Jonikal, cruising the French and Italian Riviera. Italian photographer Mario Brenner obtained the image of Dodi and Diana embracing or kissing. The picture and reports of the price it commanded transformed the attention around them. By August 6th, when the couple returned to England, the media climate had changed. On August 7th, reports of the romance were circulating prominently. Before those pictures, Dodi was not generally recognizable in the street. After them, his face traveled with Diana's around the world. Fellow travelers, We know how quickly a name can be reduced once a famous person stands beside it. In August 1997, 42 years of Dodi's life were pushed behind one description: Diana's companion. Kelly Fisher did not accept the transformation quietly. On August 15th, reports covered her breach of contract lawsuit and a press conference with attorney Gloria Allred. Fisher publicly accused Dodi of abandoning her. She believed she had been led toward marriage and then discarded. There was Suzanne Gregard, married around New Year's and divorced about 8 months later. There was Kelly Fisher, now making a public legal claim. Then there was Diana, whose romantic relationship with Dodi had existed for only weeks and whose presence drew cameras on a scale Dodi had never experienced. Dodi had spent years seeking recognition. Recognition arrived as pursuit. On August 22nd, Diana and Dodi flew to Nice and boarded Jonikal again. They cruised around France, Monaco and Sardinia with bodyguards Trevor Rees-Jones and Kieran Wingfield. By then the romance was public, the Fisher lawsuit was public, and newspapers were treating every movement as evidence of a future. Talk of a ring would soon sharpen that speculation. Paris would supply the object. Every complication followed Dodi into the same few weeks. The old financial disorder had never produced an independent enterprise. The film credits had never quite freed him from Mohamed. Suzanne's marriage had failed. Kelly's alleged engagement was disputed in public. The romance with Diana became famous before it had time to become old. Around Dodi in August 1997, there was wealth, then pursuit, then argument. The hollow thing was time. Dodi and Diana had almost none of it. On August 30th, they left Sardinia for Paris. For Dodi and Diana, the last day had begun. At about 3:20 in the afternoon of August 30th, 1997, Dodi and Diana arrived at Le Bourget airport from Olbia, Sardinia. Paparazzi were already waiting. Philippe Dourneau, their regular chauffeur, drove them in a Mercedes S600. It was not the car in which they would die. They went first to Villa Windsor in the Bois de Boulogne, a property associated with Mohamed Al-Fayed. At about 4:30, they reached the Ritz area. Dodi visited Riposi in Place Vendôme and obtained the ring that would later be examined frame by frame, receipt by receipt, witness by witness. The ring belonged to Riposi's Dis-moi oui, or Tell Me Yes collection. Dodi may have intended to propose during 30 or 31 August. Diana had not jointly chosen the ring with him as an engagement ring, and she was not planning marriage. No accepted proposal had been established. On 30 August, the ring was simply another object moving through Dodi's final day. At about 7 o'clock, Dodi and Diana left the Ritz for the apartment in Rue Arsène Housset. Photographers followed. A minor confrontation involving photographers and staff occurred at the apartment. The pressure was no longer an abstract newspaper market. It was present at the door. At about 9:30, the couple left for a planned dinner at Chez Benoit. During the journey, Dodi changed the plan and directed the chauffeur back to the Ritz. The unwanted paparazzi attention influenced his decision. At approximately 9:50 to 9:52, they arrived unexpectedly at the hotel. Staff had not been expecting them. Dodi was unhappy with the confusion. At 10 o'clock, Ritz security telephoned Henri Paul, who was off duty. CCTV showed him returning shortly after 10, roughly 7 to 10 minutes after the call. The timing would later matter because an unexpected recall left little room for the elaborate advance plot Mohamed would come to believe. Dodi and Diana went to the Imperial Suite. At about 10:20 to 10:24, a plan was communicated. Regular vehicles would remain at the front to distract photographers, while a third car would use the rear exit. Dodi devised the rear exit and third car plan after returning to the Ritz. At about 12:20 on 31st August, Dodi and Diana left the Ritz through the rear entrance on Rue Cambon. Henri Paul drove a Mercedes-Benz S280. Bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones sat in the front passenger seat. Dodi and Diana sat in the rear. Photographers quickly realized the couple had gone out the back and began to follow. At approximately 12:23, the Mercedes entered the Pont de l'Alma underpass. The Mercedes had a glancing contact with another car, believed to have been a white Fiat Uno. The French investigation never conclusively identified its driver. The Mercedes struck the 13th central pillar and spun around. Its impact speed was estimated at about 105 kilometers an hour or 65 miles an hour. No mechanical defect in the Mercedes contributed to the crash. None of the occupants was wearing a seatbelt at impact. Henri Paul and Dodi suffered fatal injuries. Both were pronounced dead at the scene. Diana was alive and taken to Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital, where she later died. Trevor Rees-Jones was the sole survivor. Dodi was 42. Dodi died from catastrophic injuries sustained in the crash. Henri Paul's femoral blood contained an ethanol level of 1.75 grams per litre. Fluoxetine, norfluoxetine, and thiapride were also detected. Dodi's body was returned to Britain. At about 9 in the evening of 31st August, the day he died, he was buried at Brookwood Cemetery near Woking in Surrey. In October, his body was quietly exhumed and reburied on the Fayed family estate at Barrow Green Court near Oxted. The first grave at Brookwood had already become an elaborate memorial setting. The second burial moved Dodi onto family ground. The most famous woman in the world had died after the same crash. Global mourning centered, understandably, on Diana. Dodi became the man beside her, the passenger, the boyfriend, the other name in the sentence. He had spent decades trying to step fully beyond Mohammed's name. Death placed him in Diana's. After the crash, Mohamed Al-Fayed became convinced that his son and Diana had been murdered. He argued that British security services, the establishment or Prince Philip, had acted because Diana was pregnant with Dodi's child and intended to marry him. Mohamed pursued those claims for roughly a decade. Operation Paget examined the ring, pregnancy, Henri Paul, the Mercedes, alleged intelligence links, unidentified vehicles, the white Fiat Uno, medical treatment, and claims about British and French conduct. It found no evidence of an MI6 murder operation, no evidence that Prince Philip ordered action, and no evidence that MI6 had been surveilling Diana during her private trips with Dodi. It rejected the pregnancy premise and found that the weight of evidence did not support an imminent marriage. From October 2007 into April 2008, the British inquest returned to the deaths. On 7th April 2008, the jury concluded that Dodi and Diana had been unlawfully killed through the grossly negligent driving of Henri Paul and the pursuing paparazzi vehicles. Paul's alcohol impairment contributed. The failure to wear seatbelts contributed. The Mercedes had no contributing mechanical defect. Those conclusions did not return Dodi to his father, and they did not return Dodi to himself. Kelly Fisher's lawsuit also ended after Dodi's death. She withdrew it and, through her lawyer, said that she forgave him. The legal dispute that had become public on August 15, 1997, therefore closed without resolving Dodi's disputed promise of marriage. In 1998, Mohamed created a Harrods memorial with photographs of Diana and Dodi, a wine glass said to bear Diana's lipstick, and the ring linked with the possible proposal. In 2005, he unveiled Innocent Victims, a large bronze statue showing them dancing. In 2018, after Mohamed had sold Harrods, the store removed the statue and returned it to the Fayed family. We watch lives such as Dodi's and count the visible things: the monthly allowance, Jonikal, family apartments, the Ritz, the film credits. Yet the people who knew him kept returning to another inventory: shyness, generosity, impulsiveness, insecurity, the wish to please, and a loneliness that servants and aircraft had not cured. His greatest film success, Chariots of Fire, won 4 Academy Awards in 1982. Dodi belonged to its financing and executive production history, while David Putnam received the Best Picture Oscar. His romance with Diana filled newspapers in August 1997, but it had lasted only weeks. His father built bronze memory around the couple, and even that memorial eventually left Harrods. The symmetry is severe. Dodi grew up under Mohammed's authority. He entered film through an operation funded by Mohammed. He lived amid assets provided by Mohammed. After Dodi died, Mohammed spent years defining what the death meant. In life, the son's independence was difficult to measure. In death, the father again became the loudest voice. And yet 42 years remained behind the headline Alexandria in 1955, La Rosie in 1968, Sandhurst in 1974, Allied Stars in 1979, an Academy Triumph in 1982, Samira's death, Suzanne's brief marriage, film credits, Kelly Fisher, Saint-Tropez, Jonikal, and 3 Minutes in Paris. There was no proven hidden machinery waiting in the Pont de l'Alma. There was an impaired driver, grossly negligent speed, pursuing vehicles, unbelted occupants, and a sequence of decisions compressed into 3 minutes. Dodi, who had lived beside other people's great names, became one of history's most famous companions. His own name remains Dodi Fayed. The fallen scepter lies where it fell, the throne is empty, and the palace has gone quiet. If you found something of yourself in this story, even for a moment, you may find it in the next one too. Subscribe to The Fallen Scepter and stay with us. There are many more lives to remember.